back to another video. Today I'll be making my version of gluten-free yeast donuts. So, to get started, I'm gonna heat up 1 1/4 cups of whole milk, or oat milk if you'd like, until about 105 to 110 degrees. So I got my measurement here, and I'll be pouring in 1 1/4 cup milk. And I'm just gonna put this in the microwave to heat it up. So about 40 seconds later, my milk is warm enough that I can keep my finger in it, but I can't hold it. And so that's generally a good rule of thumb to know when to add your yeast. So I'll be adding 4 teaspoons of yeast. 1, 2, 3, 4. And to this, I'll be adding 1/4 cup of sugar. So I've got my 1/4 cup of sugar here, and so I'm just gonna pour this in with my milk and yeast and whisk it till it's dissolved. And this is gonna sit for about 10 minutes on the side while I get my dry ingredients ready. So I mixed this really well. All the yeast is dissolved, so I'm just gonna let this sit aside over here. And next, I will just start on my dry ingredients. So I'm gonna be using a bigger bowl, and I will start by tearing it. And this is 93 grams of sorghum flour or millet flour that I'm gonna add in. And I'd like to add now, so while this has been getting ready, I took out 2 eggs from the refrigerator and I'm letting them come up to room temperature. And then I melted 3½ tablespoons of salted butter. If you use unsalted, add some salt to this recipe, but I will not be adding any extra salt. So I had melted my butter, and now I'm letting it cool down. So it's still gonna be a bit melted, but it's not gonna cook the egg. So to continue, I got my sorghum flour down here. And next up, I'm gonna add 189 grams of oat flour. So here, I got a package of oat flour. I use a certified gluten-free oat flour that I get from Azure. Now I'm just gonna get it out and add it to my bowl of dry ingredients. So now that I got my oat flour in, I'm gonna be adding 185 grams of tapioca starch. So now to this, to help keep it together when I cook it, I'm gonna be adding 2 teaspoons of xanthin to my dry ingredients. So for my last dry ingredient, it's just gonna be a teaspoon of the baking powder. And this helps give a bit more fluff to these rather than just relying on yeast. And now to this, I'm gonna give it a good mix and set it aside. So now that I got my dry ingredients set aside in a big bowl, my yeast mixture is now puffed up from all the time that is able to set aside. So now to this, I'm gonna be pouring in my yeast mixture that's proof. I'm just gonna get all of my sugar that might have not dissolved into this. And I'm gonna get my melted butter that I melted earlier. That has been cooling on the side. Add that in. I got about 3 to 4 tablespoons of this. So now that I got my 2 eggs, I'm gonna just crack these in and add these to the mix. I'm just gonna give this a good mix now. So now I'm just slowly gonna incorporate this 1 spoon at a time until I have my dough created. And then I'll start pressing them out, rolling out donuts. So now that I've pretty much gotten all my flour incorporated, I'm gonna start using my hands, because the goal is to have a dough that I can roll out and shape. If it's the case for you and you find that your dough is a lot stickier than you'd hope, you can add some extra flour. And the goal is just to make a dough that you could work with. So in my case, I'll add a bit more tapioca starch or oat flour, but you can really use anything that's gluten-free, so you can even use a gluten-free mix. When you're making gluten-free doughs, there's no need to really knead it much, because there isn't really much to knead, as you're not building any gluten. So for me, I just mix and knead until it's fully incorporated. Alright, so I've added about 1 extra handful of flour, and even though it's still a bit sticky, I'm not super interested in adding any more flour. So I will put a dusting of oat flour and start rolling this out. So now that I got my dough, I'm just gonna roll this out to about a 1/2 inch thick. And if you want your donuts a bit thicker, you can do a 3/4 of an inch. And because I didn't add too much flour, I'm just gonna be dusting with extra oat flour. So I'm personally done rolling this out. So for myself, at least what I like is I like to do some longer rectangular donuts, like a long john. And then for other breads or donuts, I'll do some circles. So I'll be doing 3 different types. But I think the easiest to start off with is long johns, since they're just a rectangle and you don't need a press. So to do that, I'm just gonna be squaring off some dough. And I'm gonna do 2 of these, so I'm just gonna cut. And this is really your choice how you wanna do this. I'm gonna try to make these on the smaller side. And so you see here, I've really made some. And this is pretty good for me. I don't need more, and then I'm pretty comfortable with how these are. And it's also pretty easy to do other shapes other than long johns. So I have a little bit of a press here that I can use to make some circles. And in the case of wanting to do donuts with holes or not, it's your choice. I think that if you use a hole, they don't poof up as much. So it's really preference. But for me, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some with holes and some without. So to make the hole, I have an apple core, and I'm just gonna press out the middle of these to make my donuts. If you wanna make donut holes, you can just cook these as is. But for me, I'm gonna roll this out again so that I can make only full donuts. Now that I have this all together, I'm just gonna knead this all into a ball again, coat with some oat flour and roll it out again. And now I'm just gonna roll this out a second time. And I'm gonna repeat this process until I am out of dough. So I like to think that gluten-free cooking is all about experimenting. So at least for me today, my last bit of dough, I don't quite feel like rolling this out again. So I just shaped it into another donut. And I like how that looks. And I'm gonna try cooking it and see if it cooks differently. Because I don't really know. So this is how I'm gonna learn making gluten-free stuff. I'll also be doing 2 little donut holes. So here I have my sheet tray that I lined with some parchment paper. And I'm not too paying attention to this on how I put these on. I just want to leave about 1 inch apart for them to proof overnight. So I'll be experimenting with some donut holes, which I've never tried this. And I'll just be lining these out. And I'm gonna cover them with some plastic wrap and just let this sit in my fridge overnight to help develop some of the flavors. And by doing this, it's more convenient, so you don't have to wake up early in the morning to do this. So now that I got this set, I'm gonna take this into my fridge overnight, and I'll see you tomorrow morning to cook these. All right, so it's the next morning now, and I have let my donuts come to room temperature for about 45 minutes so that they're not as cold as the refrigerator, and that's gonna help frying make it easier. So what I'm gonna do now is turn my pan on to medium heat and pour in about 4 cups of oil. Depending on what pan you're using, you might need more or less oil, but the goal here is to have at least 2 inches of oil, and that really helps for when they expand while cooking. So I have almost 2 inches of oil here, and now I'm just gonna put it on a thermometer. And the goal here is to heat your oil to 360 degrees. And this is, you need to have your temperature a bit cooler than you would use normal yeast donuts, because with the gluten-free, you have to cook out more water. And it makes it better just having it at a lower temperature for a bit longer. So I'm just gonna monitor this and let my oil come up to 360. Alright guys, so my oil is now at a 360 degrees, and I'm gonna start cooking. So I tend to need about a minute on each side to 2 minutes, and I cook them until they're golden. And I try not to do more than 4 donuts at a time, because then it drops the heat too much. Even though my temperature's up, I'm still gonna keep the thermometer to monitor and make sure that I'm at a consistent 360. But I'm just gonna cook these until they're dark and golden brown, like I'll show you once they get there. So this is how I tend to know when they're about ready to flip. They're really dark and brown, and this is what's really good here, this brown color. So I'll go ahead and flip these. And I have my thermometer in so that can tell me that my heat's too hot. So I'm about 5 degrees too hot. So I'm just gonna turn down my heat and continue to monitor this. So now that it's been about an extra minute, these are ready, and I'm gonna take them out. And I'm gonna be putting these on the same pan as before, and then I just put a sheet of paper towel to let these drip. I'm just gonna set these aside to cool down as I cook the others. So same process now. Just dropping them in. And these ones don't have holes, so you'll see that there's gonna be an air pocket in the middle, and that helps if you wanna fill them with something. So I'm just gonna continue to monitor the temperature of this because my oil has gotten a bit hotter than it should be. And I'm just gonna continue cooking these for about a minute on each side at 360 degrees. So now that I'm finished cooking all of these, I'm gonna go glaze them now. As the first ones are gonna be nice and cool, ready to glaze, and these ones are gonna cool as we glaze them all. So now that I'm done frying, I'm gonna bring these over here and let them sit. And I'm gonna start, since I like to do vanilla and chocolate, I'll start with my vanilla, and that way I can just use the same bowl that I had vanilla for the chocolate, just and it'll give it a bit of vanilla taste. Alright, so I'm just gonna go in with a couple cups of sugar. So I'm just gonna do a couple cups. I like to have enough glaze. I don't have some exact measurements, but because the powdered sugar dissolves, you do need quite a bit. And also when doing this, I do want to remember that I can just use whatever scraps from this vanilla in my chocolate. So for my way of making this, I like to use vanilla bean paste. So I'm just gonna put a half teaspoon in this. I like seeing the seeds on this. And to create a liquid, I'm going to use some half and half, or you could use whole milk or water. I prefer the thickness from this. I'm just going to add about a tablespoon and see what this gets me. And I'm just going to add enough liquid until it's a good dippable consistency. But because the powdered sugar dissolves really fast, don't use too much so you don't know what effect it might have. So for my vanilla glaze, this is pretty much ready. It's still a bit thick, so I might thin it down just a bit with a little splash more of half and half or liquid. But I don't want it too liquidy, and I want to be able to spread it and be able to dip my donuts and have it stream off, but not completely have all of it fall off. So now to start dipping, I'm just gonna start with my oldest fried donuts. Give them a good dip and shake off the excess. And continue dipping until I have dipped about half of mine, because I'm doing half vanilla, half chocolate. It should look something like this. So for my donuts like this, if you want to fill them with something, like the cream from my cream puff video, you'll see that there's a nice hollow center. And if I go to slice them open, you can see how they would be good for something that you want to fill, because there's a good crevice to inject something. But they're also delicious just dipped. So now that I've dipped about half of them with my vanilla glaze, I'm just going to turn it into chocolate with a couple spoons of cocoa powder. I like this on the chocolatey side, so I'm not going to do my best to measure. I'm just going to add a couple tablespoons and stir it in gently. Try not to splash it everywhere. And because you're adding starch, you might need to add a bit more half and half, or whatever liquid you're using. So now that I mixed my cocoa powder in with a bit more half and half, I'll just go ahead and dip the rest of my donuts. And there you have it. That's how I make my favorite gluten-free yeast donut with a chocolate and vanilla frosting. I think that these are amazing early in the morning to help wake up. If you have any questions, leave a comment below the video. If you're curious about the recipe, as always, I'll have it in the description. And until next time, bye-bye.